at the Weasleys.
Oh, at the Weasleys, okay.
Not in Private Drive, no.
Right.
The ghoul in the attic howled and dropped pipes whenever he felt things were getting too quiet. And small explosions from Fred and George's bedroom were considered perfectly normal. What Harry found most unusual about life at Lone, however, wasn't the talking mirror or the clanking ghoul, it was the fact that everybody there seemed to like him. Mrs. Weasley fussed over the state of his socks and tried to force him to eat 4 helpings at every meal. Mr. Weasley liked Harry to sit next to him at the dinner table so that he could bombard him with questions about life with muggles, asking him to explain how things like plugs and postal services work. Fascinating, he would say, as Harry talked him through using a telephone. Ingenious, really, how many ways would have found sitting around without magic. Harry heard from Hogwarts one sunny morning, about a week after he had arrived at the Burrow. He and Ron went down to breakfast to find Mr. and Mrs. Weasley and Ginny already sitting at the kitchen table. The moment she saw Harry, Ginny accidentally knocked her porridge bowl to the floor with a loud clatter. Ginny seemed very prone to knocking things over whenever Harry entered the room. She dived under the table to retrieve the bowl and emerged with her face glowing like the setting sun. Pretending he hadn't noticed this, Harry sat down and took the toast Mrs. Weasley offered him. Letters from school, said Mr.
That was
Weasley.
nice of him to pretend he didn't notice.
Yeah.
I guess he does a lot of pretending with his weird parents.
Letters from school, said Mr. Weasley, passing Harry and Ron identical envelope of yellowish parchment, addressed in green ink. Dumbledore already knows you're here, Harry. Isn't it a trick, that man? You two have got them too, he added, as Fred and George ambled in, still in their pajamas. For a few minutes there was silence as they all read their letters. Harry's told him to catch the Hogwarts Express as usual from King's Cross Station on September 1st. There was also a list of the new books he needed for the coming year. Second year students will require The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 2, by Miranda Bosshawk. Breaking with a Banshee, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Getting with Ghouls, by
Does he have to go back into the vault to get his money again this year?
I don't think so. I don't think it's enough mentioned.
Does he have enough?
I think in the first book he said it would be good for a couple of terms. Getting with Ghouls, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Holidays with Hags, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Travels with Trolls, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Voyages with Vampires, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Wanderings with Werewolves, by Gilderoy Lockhart. Year with the Yeti, by Gilderoy Lockhart.
He was such a fraud, eh?
He was, indeed. Fred, who had finished his own list, peered over at Harry's. You've been told to get all Lockhart's books too, he said. The new Defense Against the Dark art teacher must be a fan, bet it's a witch.
Isn't it Gilderoy Lockhart is Defense Against the Dark Arts?
Right, but he doesn't know that yet.
Right, but they're getting his own books.
Yeah. At this point, Fred caught his mother's eye and quickly busied himself with the marmalade. That lot won't come cheap, said George, with a quick look at his parents. Lockhart's books are really expensive. Well, we'll manage, said Mrs. Weasley, but she looked worried. I expect you'll be able to pick up a lot of Ginny's things second-hand. Oh, are you starting at Hogwarts this year, Harry asked Ginny. She nodded, blushing to the roots of her flaming hair, and put her elbow in the butter dish.
Sweet little girl.
Fortunately, no one saw this except Harry, because just then Ron's older brother Percy walked in. He was already dressed, his Hogwarts prefect badge pinned to his sweater vest. Morning all, said Harry briskly. Lovely day. He sat down in the only remaining chair, but leapt up again almost immediately, pulling from underneath him a molting grey feather duster. At least that's what Harry thought it was, until he saw it was breathing. Errol, said Ron, taking the limp out from Percy and extracting a letter from under its wing. Finally, he's got Hermione's answer. I wrote her saying we were going to try and rescue you from the Dursleys. He carried Errol to the perch just inside the back door and tried to stand him on it, but Errol flopped straight off again, so Ron lay him on the draining board instead, muttering pathetic. Then he ripped open Hermione's letter and read it out loud. Dear Ron and Harry, if you were there. I hope that everything went alright and that Harry is okay and that you didn't do anything illegal to get him out wrong, because that would get Harry into trouble too. I've been really worried, and if Harry is alright, will you please let me know at once, but perhaps it would be better if you use a different owl, because I think another delivery might finish this one off. I'm very busy with schoolwork, of course. How can she be such an horror? We're on vacation. And we're going to London next Wednesday to buy my new books. Why don't we meet in Diagon Alley? Let me know what's happening as soon as you can. Love from Hermione. Well, it fits in nicely. We can go and get all your things then too, snuttered Mrs. Weasley, starting to clear the table. What are you all up to today? Harry, Ron, Fred and George are planning to go up the hill to a small paddock by the Weasley's own. It was surrounded by trees that led from here to the village below, meaning that they could practice Quidditch there, as long as they didn't fly too high. They couldn't use a real Quidditch ball, which would have been hard to explain if they had escaped and flown away over the village. Instead, they threw apples for each other to catch. They took turns riding Harry's Nimbus 2000, which was easily the best broom. Ron's old shooting star was often outstripped by passing butterflies. 5 minutes later, they were marching up the hill, broomstick over their shoulders. They had asked Percy if he wanted to join them, but he said he was busy. Harry had only seen Percy at mealtime so far. He stayed shut up in his room the rest of the time. Wish I knew what he was up to, said Fred, frowning. He is not himself. His exam results came the day before you did. 12 owls and he hardly loaded at all. Ordinary wizarding levels, George explained, seeing Harry's puzzled look. Bill got 12 too. If you're not careful, we'll have another head boy in the family. I don't think I could stand the shame. Bill was the oldest one.
And yet Ron, that's what he saw in the mirror when he was in the...
Right, yes. Bill was the oldest Weasley brother. He and the next brother, Charlie, had already left Hogwarts. Harry had never met either of them, but knew that Charlie was in Romania studying dragons. Wait a minute. He did... Oh no, there's only her friends that came up to...
I'm sorry?
It was only Charlie's friends that came up to get Norbert the last year, wasn't it? Yeah. I don't think Charlie was with them. Okay. And Bill in Egypt working for the Wizards Bank Gringotts. To know how Mom and Dad are going to afford all our school stuff this year, said George after a while. 5 sets of Lockhart books. And Ginny needs robes and a wand and everything. Harry said nothing. He felt a bit awkward. Stored in an underground vault at Gringotts in London was a small fortune that his parents had left him. Of course, it was only in the wizarding world that he had money. He couldn't use galleons, sickles and nuts in muggle shops. He had never mentioned his Gringotts bank account to the Dursleys. He didn't think the horror of anything connected with magic would stretch to a large pile of gold. Mrs. Weasley woke them all early the following Wednesday. After a quick half a dozen bacon sandwiches each, they pulled on their coats, and Mrs. Weasley took a flower pot off the kitchen mantelpiece and peered inside. We are running low, Arthur, she sighed. We'll have to buy some more today. Ah, well, guess first. After you, Harry, dear. And she opened the flower pot. What am I supposed to do, he stammered. He's never travelled by Floo power, said Ron suddenly. Sorry, Harry, I forgot. Never, said Mr. Weasley, but how did you get to Diagon Alley to buy your school things last year? I went on the underground. Really, said Mr. Weasley eagerly. Were escapaders? How exactly? Not now, Arthur, said Mrs. Weasley. Floo powder is a lot quicker, dear, but goodness me, if you never used it before. You'll be all right, Mom, said Fred. Harry, watch us first. He took a pinch of the glittering flour out of the flower pot, stepped into the fire, and threw the powder into the flames. With a roar, the fire turned emerald green and rose higher than Fred, who stepped right into it and shouted Diagon Alley, and vanished. You must speak clearly, dear, Mrs. Weasley said Harry as George dipped his hand in the flower pot. You threw it out at the right grate. The right what? Said Harry nervously as the fire roared and whipped George out of sight too. Well, there are an awful lot of wizard fires to choose from, you know, but as long as you've spoken clearly... You'll be fine, Molly, don't fuss, said Mr. Weasley, helping himself to food powder too. But dear, if he gets lost, how would we ever explain his to his aunt and uncle? They wouldn't mind, Harry reassured her. Dudley would think it was a brilliant joke if I got lost up a chimney. Don't worry about that. Well, alright, you go after Arthur, said Mrs. Weasley. Now, when you get to the fire, say where you're going. And keep your elbows tucked in, Ron advised. And your eyes shut, said Mrs. Weasley. That suits? Don't fidget, said Ron, or you might well fall out of the wrong fireplace. But don't panic and get out too early. Wait until you
all these directions,
wait until you
goodness.
see Fred and George. Trying hard to bear his own in mind, Harry took a pinch of Floo powder and walked to the edge of the fire. He took a deep breath, scattered the powder into the flames, and stepped forward. The fire felt like a warm breeze. He opened his mouth and immediately swallowed a lot of hot ash. The Diagon Alley, he coughed. It felt as though he was being sucked down a giant drain. It seemed to be spinning very fast. The roaring in his ears was deafening. He tried to keep his eyes open, but the whirl of green flames made him feel sick. Something hard knocked his elbow and he tucked it in tightly. Still spinning and spinning. Now it felt as though cold hands were slapping in his face. Squinting through his glasses, he saw a blurred stream of fireplaces and snatches glimpses from the rooms beyond. His bacon sandwiches were churning inside him. He closed his eye again, wishing it would stop, and then he fell face forward into a cold stone and felt the bridge of his glasses snap. Dizzy and bruised, covered in soot, he got gingerly to his feet, holding his broken glasses up to his eyes. He was quite alone, but where he was, he had no idea. All he could tell was that he was standing in a stone fireplace of what looked like a large, dimly lit wizard's shop. But nothing in here was ever likely to be on Hogwarts' school list. A glass case nearby held a withered hand on a cushion, a blood-stained pack of cards, and a staring glass eye. Evil-looking masks stared down from the walls, and assorted human bones lay up on a counter, and rusty spiked instruments hung from the ceiling. Even worse, the dark, narrow street Harry could see through the dusty shop window was definitely not Diagon Alley. The sooner he got out of here, the better. Something. There's some paper's been ripped. Like.
What? You don't know it by heart?
Well, see, you can't read it. There's this plot thread where the paper pages stuck together, and this was kind of ripped off. Something, where it had hit the hearth. Harry made his way swiftly and silently toward the door, but before he got halfway toward it, two people appeared on the other side of the glass, and one of them was the very last person Harry wanted to meet when he was lost, covered in soot and wearing broken glasses. Draco Malfoy. Harry looked quickly around and spotted a large black cabinet to his left. He shot inside it and pulled the doors closed, leaving a small crack to peer through. A second later, the bell clanged and Malfoy stepped into the shop. The man who followed could only be Draco's father. He had the same pale-pointed face and identical cold grey eyes. Mr. Malfoy crossed the shop, looked lazily at the items on display, and rang a bell on the counter before turning to his son and saying, "Touch nothing, Draco." Malfoy, who had reached for the glass eye, said, "I thought you were going to buy me a present." "I said I would buy you a racing broom," said his father, drumming his fingers on the counter. "What's the good of that if I'm not on the house team?" said Malfoy, looking sulky and bad-tempered. "Harry Potter got a number 2000 last year. Special permission from Dumbledore so he could pay for Gryffindor. He's not even that good. It's just because he's famous. Famous for the stupid scar on his forehead." Malfoy bent down to examine a shelf full of skulls. "Everyone thinks he's so smart. Wonderful Potter with a scar and a broomstick." "You have told me this at least a dozen times already," said Mr. Malfoy with a quelling look at his son. "And I would remind you that it is not prudent to appear less than fond of Harry Potter, not when most of our kind regard him as the hero who made the Dark Lord disappear. Ah, Mr. Borgin." A stooping man had appeared behind the counter, smoothing his greasy hair back from his face. "Mr. Malfoy, what a pleasure to see you again," said Mr. Borgin in a voice of odious hair. "Delighted, and young Master Malfoy too, charmed. How may I be of assistance? I must show you just today, and very reasonably priced." "I am not buying today, Mr. Borgin, but selling," said Mr. Malfoy. "Selling?" The smile faded slightly from Mr. Borgin's face. You have heard, of course, that the Ministry is conducting more raids, said Mr. Malfoy, taking the roll of parchment from his inside pocket and unraveling it for Mr. Borgin to read. I have a few items at home that might embarrass me if the Ministry were to call. Mr. Borgin fixed a pair of pince-nez to his nose and looked down the list. The Ministry wouldn't presume to trouble you, sir, surely? Mr. Malfoy's lips curled. I have not been visited yet. The name Malfoy still commands a certain respect. Yet the Ministry grows more and more meddlesome. There are rumors about a new Muggle Protection Act. No doubt a flea-bitten Muggle-loving fool Arthur Weasley is behind it. Harry felt a hot surge of anger. And as you can see, certain of these poisons might make it appear. I understand, sir, of course, said Mr. Borgin. Let me see. Can I have that? Interrupted Draco, pointing at the withered hand on his cushion. Ah, the hand of glory, said Mr. Borgin, abandoning Mr. Malfoy.
The what? Hand of
Hand of glory.
Glory.
Yeah. Abandoning Malfoy's fist and scurrying over to Draco. Insert a candle in it, and it gives light only to the holder. Best free friend of thieves and plunderers. Your son has fine taste, sir. I hope my son will amount to more than a thief and a plunderer, Borgin, said Malfoy coldly, and Mr. Borgin said quickly, No offence, sir, no offence meant. Though if his grey don't pick up, said Mr. Malfoy, more coldly still, that may be indeed be all he is fit for. It's not my fault, retorted Draco. The teachers all have favourites. That Hermione Granger. I would have thought you'd be ashamed that a girl of no wizard family beat you in every exam, snapped Mr. Malfoy. Ha, said Harry under his breath, pleased to see Draco looking both abashed and angry. It's the same all over, said Mr. Borgin in his oily voice. Wizard blood is counted for less everywhere. Not with me, said Mr. Malfoy, his long nostrils flaring. No, sir, nor with me, sir, said Mr. Borgin with a deep bow. In that case, perhaps we can return to my list, said Mr. Malfoy shortly. I am in something of a hurry, Mr. Borgin. I have important business elsewhere today. They started to haggle. Harry watched nervously as Draco drew nearer and nearer to his hiding place, examining objects for sale. Draco paused to examine a long coil of hangman's rope and to read, smirking, the card propped up on a magnificent necklace of opals. See, some of these things appear in book 6 and 7. The opals appear in book 6 and the Hand of Glory appears in book 7.
What is the Hand of Glory?
Well, put a candle in and give light only to the beholder.
Okay.
And it has a Peruvian darkness powder, and so Draco was able to go into Hogwarts concealed by darkness, and he could lead the way with his crows. And Harry Potter couldn't go anywhere to warn the others. Anyway, so that was that, and then the opals was in book 6. He tried to kill Professor Dumbledore. And they nearly killed the students. Anyway, okay, so they started. Okay, where are we? Okay. The magnificent necklace of opals. Caution, do not touch. Cursed. Cursed. Has claimed the lives of 19 Muggle owners to date. Draco turned away and saw the cabinet right in front of him. He walked forward. He stretched out his hand for a handle. Done, said Mr. Malfoy at the counter. Come, Draco. Harry wiped his forehead.
So is Harry in the cupboard?
Yep.
Did he get out of the fire and then crawl into the cupboard?
Yeah, because he heard if people come and he wanted to hide somewhere.
Okay.
So that's where he hid. And now they are going away, and Harry wiped his forehead on his sleeve, and as Draco turned away. Good day to you, Mr. Borgin. I'll expect to see you at the manor tomorrow to pick up the goods. The moment the door had closed, Mr. Borgin dropped his oily manner. Good day to yourself, Mr. Malfoy. And if the stories are true, you haven't even told me half of what's hidden in your manor. Muttering darkly, Mr. Borgin disappeared into the back room. Harry waited for a minute in case he'd come back, then, quietly as he could, slipped out of the cabinet, past the glass cases, and out of the shop door. Clutching his broken glasses to his face, Harry stared around. See, the bell would ring when Harry got out of the store. And Borgin could. But anyway.
Oh, it does ring?
Well, it rang when the other guys came in.
Does it ring when he comes out?
It must have. But of course, Harry would be away when Borgin made the door.
Mm-hmm.
Clutching the broken glasses to his face, Harry stared around. He had emerged into a dingy alleyway that seemed to be made up entirely of shops devoted to the dark arts. The one he had just left, Borgin and Burke's, looked like the largest, but opposite was a nasty window display of shrunken heads, and 2 doors down a large cage was alive with gigantic black spiders. 2 shabby-looking wizards were watching him from the shadow of a doorway, muttering to each other. Feeling jumpy, Harry sat up, trying to hold his glasses on straight and hoping against hope that he'd be able to find a way out of here. An old wooden street sign hanging over a shop selling poisonous candles told him that he was in Knockturn Alley. It didn't help, as Harry had never heard of such a place. He supposed he hadn't spoken clearly enough through his mouthful of ashes back in the Weasley's fire. Trying to stay calm, he wondered what to do. "Not lost, are you, my dear?" said a voice in his ear, making him jump. An aged witch stood in front of him, holding a tray of what looked horribly like whole human fingernails. She leered at him, showing mossy teeth. Harry backed away. "I'm fine, thanks," he said. "I'm just—" "Harry, what do you think you're doing down here?" Harry's heart leapt. So did the witch. A load of fingernails cascaded down over her feet, and she knocked as she cursed the massive form of Hagrid. The Hogwarts gamekeeper came striding towards them, beetle-black eyes flashing over his great bristling beard. "Hagrid," Harry croaked in relief. "I was lost. Floo powder." Hagrid seized Harry by the scruff of his neck and pulled him away from the witch, knocking the tray right out of her hands. Her shrieks followed them all the way down the twisting alleyway out into the bright sunlight. Harry saw a familiar snow-white marble building in the distance. Gringotts Bank. Hagrid had steered him right into Diagon Alley. "You're a mess," said Hagrid gruffly.
You're what?
"You're a mess," said Hagrid gruffly, brushing suit off Harry so forcefully he nearly knocked him into a barrel of dragon dung outside an apothecary. "Skulking around Knockturn Alley. I don't know, dodgy place, Harry. Don't want to go, no one to see you down there." "I realize that," said Harry, ducking as Hagrid made to brush him off again. "I told you I was lost. What were you doing down there, anyway?" "I was looking for a flesh-eating slug repellent," growled Hagrid. "They're ruining the school cabbages." "You're not on your own?" "I'm staying with the Weasleys, but we got separated," Harry explained. "I've got to go and find them." They set off together down the street. "How come you never rode back to me?" said Hagrid as Harry jogged alongside him. He had to take 3 steps every stride of Hagrid's enormous boots. Harry explained all about Dobby and the Dursleys. "Lousy muggles," groaned Hagrid. "If I'd have known—" Harry, over here!" Harry looked up and saw Hermione Granger standing at the top of the wide flight of the steps in Gringotts. He ran down to meet them, her bushy brown hair flying behind her.
Now, who does he eventually marry? Oh, he marries Ginny.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Ron marries
Hermione. Okay.
"What happened to your glasses?" "Hello, Hagrid. Oh, it's wonderful to see you again." "Are you coming into Gringotts, Harry?" "As soon as I found the Weasley," said Harry. "You won't have long to wait," said Hagrid with a grin. Harry and Hermione looked around. Sprinting up the crowded street were Ron, Fred, George, Percy, and Mr. Weasley. "Harry," Mr. Weasley panted, "we hoped you'd only got 1 grade too far." He moped the glistening bald patch. "Molly's frantic. She's coming now." "Where did you come out?" Knockturn Alley, said Hagrid grimly. "Excellent," said Fred and George together. "We've never been allowed in," said Ron enviously. "I really well think not," growled Hagrid. Mrs. Weasley now came galloping into view, her handbag swinging wildly in one hand. Ginny just clinging to the other. "Oh, Harry, only you could have been anywhere." "Just anywhere, I suppose." Gasping for breath, she pulled a large clothes brush out of her bag and began sweeping up the soot Hagrid had managed to beat away. Mr. Weasley took Harry's glasses.
The soot he had not managed to
Well, yeah, well, he didn't get it all off. Right?
I thought you said he managed to.
He just patted him and brushed him, and Harry ducked because it was too hard. And there was still some suit on. So, anyway, so what it was, Mr. Weasley took Harry's glasses, gave him a tap on his wand, and returned them good as new. "Well, gotta be off," said Hagrid, who was having his hand wrung by Mrs. Weasley. "Knockturn Alley, if you hadn't found him, Hagrid, see you at Hogwarts." And he strode away, head and shoulders taller than anyone else in the packed street. "Guess who I saw in Borkin and Burghs?" Harry asked Ron and Hermione as they climbed the Gringotts steps. "Malfoy and his father." "Did Lucius Malfoy buy anything?" said Mr. Weasley sharply behind him. "No, he was selling." So he's worried, said Mr. Weasley with a grim satisfaction. Oh, I'd love to get Lucius Malfoy for something. You be careful, Arthur, said Mrs. Weasley sharply as they were both bound into the bank by a goblin at the door. That family is trouble. Don't go biting off more than you can chew. So you don't think I'm a match for Lucius Malfoy, said Mr. Weasley indignantly. But he was distracted almost at once by the sight of Hermione's parents, who were standing nervously at a counter that ran all around the great marble hall, waiting for Hermione to introduce him. But you're Muggle, said Mr. Weasley delightedly. You must have a drink. What have you got there? Oh, you're changing Muggle money. Money, look. He pointed excitedly at a 10-pound note in Mr. Granger's hand. Meet you back there, Ron said to Hermione as the Weasleys and Harry were led off to their underground vaults by another Gringotts goblin. The vaults were reached by a means of a small goblin-driven cart that sped along the miniature trains through the bank's underground tunnel.
Oh, so he is going back in the vault.
I guess so.
But not for his own stuff.
Well, maybe he does. Maybe.
But I don't know where he would keep the money during the year.
That's right. Those things were not really discussed. In the first book, Hagrid said, "Oh, that'll be good enough for a couple of terms." Over a couple of terms, right? Not for a couple of years. Okay. So he only got enough for the year, and now he's going to get enough for the second year. Harry joined a breakneck journey down to the Weasley's vault, but felt dreadful, far worse than he had in Knockturn Alley when it was open. There was this very small pile of silver sickles inside, and just one gold galleon. Mrs. Weasley felt right into the corner before sweeping the whole lot into her bag. Harry felt even worse when they reached his vault. He tried to block the content from Floo as he hastily shoved handfuls of coins into a leather bag. Back outside on the marble steps, they all separated. Percy muttered vaguely about needing a new quill. Fred and George had spotted their friends from Hogwarts, Lee Jordan. Mrs. Weasley and Ginny were going to a second-hand robe shop. Mr. Weasley was insisting on taking the Gringotts up to the Leaky Cauldron for a drink. We'll all meet at Flourish and Blotts in an hour to buy your school book, said Mrs. Weasley, setting off with Ginny. And not one step down Knockturn Alley, she shouted at the twins, retreating back. Harry, Ron, and Hermione strolled off along the winding cobbled streets, the bag of gold, silver, and bronze jangling cheerfully in Harry's pocket was clamoring to be spent, so he bought 3 large strawberry and peanut butter ice creams. I don't think strawberry and peanut butter go together very well.
Have you not tried it?
No.
Well, you should try it, I guess.
I never can get it anywhere. It's surprising.
Well, you just have to mix it yourself.
I suppose. But they slurped happily as they wandered up the alley, examining all the fascinating shop windows. Ron gazed longingly at the full set of Chudley cannon robes in the windows of quality Quidditch supplies, until Hermione dragged them off to buy ink and parchment next door. In Gamble and Jape's Wizarding Joke Shop, they met Fred George and Lee Jordan, who were stopping up on Dr. Filibuster's fabulous wet start no-heat fireworks.
Say that again. Fabulous wet start.
Dr. Filibuster's fabulous wet start no-heat fireworks.
Wet start, no heat.
So they don't give off any heat, and you can start them wet.
Huh.
And in a tiny junk shop full of broken ones, lopsided brass.
Now, is this the year of the big deal match?
The what match?
The match, the Quidditch match, the World Cup?
No, that's in book 4.
Okay. You sure know your books.
Well, I read every once in a while, you know. And in a tiny junk shop full of broken ones, lopsided brass scales and old clocks, covered in potion stains, they found Percy deeply immersed in a small and deeply boring book called Prefects Who Gained Power. A study of Hogwarts prefects and their later careers, Ron read aloud off the back cover. That sounds fascinating. Go away, Percy snapped. Of course, he's very ambitious, Percy. He's got it all planned out. He wants to be Minister of Magic, Ron told Harry and Hermione in an undertone as they left Percy to it. An hour later, they headed for Flourish and Blotts.
He doesn't ever become Minister of Magic.
Not in the books, anyway.
Oh, you think he might become it not in the books?
Well, yeah, anybody can can continue it any way they see fit. In the fanfic, Minister of Magic.
That's right. I should go read the fanfic. See if he becomes Minister of Magic.
That's right.
Oh dear. It reminds me of Lois and Clark and all those fanfics.
Now then, an hour later they headed for Flourish and Bots. They were by no means the only ones making their way to the bookshop. As they approached it, they saw to their surprise a large crowd jostling outside the doors, trying to get in. The reason for this was proclaimed by a large banner stretched across the upper windows. Gilderoy Lockhart will be signing copies of his autobiography, Magical Me, today 12:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. You can actually meet him, Hermione squealed. I mean, he's written almost a whole book list. The crowd seemed to be made up of mostly of witches around Mrs. Weasley's age. An harassed-looking wizard stood at the door, saying, "Calmly, please, ladies, don't push there. Mind the books now." Harry, Ron, and Hermione squeezed inside. A long line wound right to the back of the shop, where Gilderoy Lockhart was signing his books. They each grabbed a copy of the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 2, and sneaked up on the line to where the rest of the Weasleys were standing with Mr. and Mrs. Granger. "Oh, there you are. Good," said Mrs. Weasley. She sounded breathless and kept petting her hair. "You'll be able to see him in a minute." Gilderoy Lockhart came slowly into view, seated at a table surrounded by large pictures of his own face, all winking and flashing dazzlingly white teeth at the crowd. The real Lockhart was wearing robes of forget-me-not blue exactly matched his eyes. His pointed wizard's head was set at a jaunty angle on his wavy hair. A short, irritable-looking man was dancing around taking photographs with a large black camera that emitted puffs of purple smoke with ever blinding flash. "Out of the way there," he snarled at Ron, moving back to get a better shot. "This is for the Daily Prophet." "Big deal," said Ron, rubbing his foot where the photographer had stepped on it. Gilderoy Lockhart heard him. He looked up. He saw Ron, and then he saw Harry. He stared. Then he leapt to his feet and positively shouted, "It can't be Harry Potter!" The crowd parted, whispering excitedly. Lockhart dived forward, seized Harry's arm, and pulled him to the front. The crowd burst into applause. Harry's face burned as Lockhart shook his hand for the photographer, who was clicking away madly, wafting thick smoke over the Weasleys. "Nice big smile, Harry," said Lockhart, through his own gleaming teeth. "Tonight, you and I are worth the front page." When he finally let go of Harry's hand, Harry could hardly feel his fingers. He tried to sidle back over to the Weasleys, but Lockhart threw an arm around his shoulders and clamped them tightly to his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly, waving for quiet, "what an extraordinary moment this is. The perfect moment for me to make a little announcement I've been sitting on for some time. When young Harry stepped here in the Flourish and Blots today, he only wanted to buy my autobiography, which I shall happy to present him now free of charge." The crowd applauded again. "He had no idea," Lockhart continued, giving Harry a little shake that made his glasses slip to the end of his nose, "that he would be shortly seeing much more than my book, Magical Me. He and his schoolmates will in fact be getting the real Magical Me. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I have great pleasure..."
How can she write this?
She's good, eh? She's so good.
No.
"I have great pleasure and pride in announcing that this September I will be taking up the post of Defense Against the Dark Art teacher at the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." The crowd cheered and clapped, and Harry found himself being presented with the entire works of Gilderoy Lockhart. Staggering slightly under their weight, he managed to make his way out of the limelight, the edge of the room, where Ginny was standing next to her new cauldron. "You have these," Harry mumbled to her, tipping the books into the cauldron. "I'll buy my own." "Bet you lived there, didn't you, Potter?" said a voice Harry had no trouble recognizing. He straightened up and found himself face to face with Draco Malfoy, who was wearing his usual sneer. "Famous Harry Potter," said Malfoy. "Can't even go into a bookstore without making the front page." "Leave him alone, he didn't want all that," said Ginny. It was the first time he had spoken in front of Harry. She was glaring at Malfoy. "Potter, you got yourself a girlfriend," drawled Malfoy. Ginny went so scarlet, and Ron and Hermione fought their way over, both clutching stacks of Lockhart's books. "Oh, it's you," said Ron, looking at Malfoy as if he were something unpleasant on the sole of his shoe. "Bet you're surprised to see Harry here, eh?" "Not as surprised to see as I am to see you on the shop, Weasley," said Malfoy. "I suppose your parents will be so hungry for a month to pay for all of those." Ron was as red as Ginny, and he dropped his book into the cauldron too, and started toward Malfoy, but Harry and Hermione grabbed the back of his jacket. "Ron," said Mr. Weasley, struggling over with Fred and George, "what are you doing? It's too crowded in here. Let's go outside." Well, 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 Arthur Weasley. It was Mr. Malfoy. He stood with his hand on Draco's shoulder, sneering in just the same way. "Lucius," said Mr. Weasley, nodding coldly. "Busy time at the Ministry, I hear," said Mr. Malfoy. "All those raids. I hope they're paying you overtime." He reached into Ginny's cauldron and extracted from amid the glossy Lockhart books a very old, battered copy of A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration. "Obviously not," Mr. Malfoy said. "Dear me, what's the use of being a disgrace to the name of a wizard, if he don't even pay you well for it?" Mr. Weasley flushed darker than either Ron or Ginny. "We have a very different idea of what disgrace is in the name of a wizard, Malfoy," he said. "Clearly," said Mr. Malfoy, his pale eyes straying to Mr. and Mrs. Granger, who were watching apprehensively. "The company you keep, Weasley, and I thought your family could sink no lower." There was a thud of metal at Ginny's cauldron and flying. Mr. Weasley had thrown himself at Mr. Malfoy, knocking him backward into the bookshelves. Dozens of heavy spell books came thundering down on all their heads. There was a yell of "Get him, Dad!" from Fred and George. Mrs. Weasley was shrieking, "No, Arthur, no!" The crowd stampeded backward, knocking more shelves over. "Gentlemen, please, please," cried the assistant, and then louder than all, "Break it up, dear gents, break it up!" Hagrid was wading to them through a sea of books. In an instant he had pulled Mr. Weasley and Mr. Malfoy apart. Mr. Weasley had a cut lip, and Mr. Malfoy had been hit in the eye by an encyclopedia of toadstools. He was still holding Ginny's old Transfiguration book. He thrust it at her, his eyes glistening with malice. "Here, girl, take your book. It's the best your father can give you." Pulling himself out of Hagrid's grip, he beckoned to Draco and swept it from the shop. "You should have ignored him, Arthur," said Hagrid, almost lifting Mr. Weasley off his feet as he straightened his robe. "Rotten to the core, the whole family. Everybody knows that. No Malfoys worth listening to. Bad blood, that's what it is. Come now, let's get out of here." The assistant looked as though he wanted to stop them leaving, but he barely came up to Hagrid's waist and seemed to think better of it. They hurried up the street.
Why did he want to stop them leaving?
I'm puzzled too.
What?
I'm puzzled too.
Because did they mess up stuff? Did the guy want him to pay for stuff, you think?
Well, I don't know. It doesn't say.
Wow. Obviously an oversight.
Another thing we can start on a fanfic story on.
I know.
A fine example is every children brawling in public. What Gilderoy Lockhart must have thought. "He was pleased," said Fred. "Didn't you hear him as you were leaving? He was asking the bloke from the Daily Prophet if he'd be able to work the fight into his report. Said it was all publicity." But it was a subdued group that headed back to the fireside of the leaky cauldron, where Harry, the Weasleys, and all their shopping would be travelling back to the Burrow using Floo powder. He said goodbye to the Grangers, who were leaving the pub for the Muggle sheet on the other side. Mr. Weasley started to ask them how the bus stops worked, but stopped quickly at the look on Mrs. Weasley's face. Harry took off his glasses and put them safely in his pocket before helping himself to Floo powder. It definitely was not his favourite way to travel. Okay, I'll have to stop here. It's getting too late.
Read, wonderful Daddy.
Sorry.
Read.
No.
What time is it?
Must be late.
Must be late. Must be late.
Yeah, it must be. So this will work and you check on.
Okay. Thank you for reading to me.
You're welcome. It is actually almost after 11. La 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 la.
There, I made it. Ta-da!
Nice. It's nice and flat at the bottom.
Well, I did it. It's a plaited diagonal plating. That's what it is. I like diagonal plating. Then you don't have to put the strips around and go over the strips.